Tell us about 25 King. This is a tall timber project in Brisbane. Tell us about the design.
Sure. Well, a little bit about the building itself. So it's a 10-storey building. We believe it's going to be the tallest commercial office building built out of timber in the world, and has the largest floor plate of any commercial office building built in timber in the world. It started life as a typical Australian building, a concrete core and concrete structure, and then working with Lend-Lease, the developers, who've built up quite an expertise in timber. We were looking for one of the major engineering companies as a tenant, and we decided if we made it a timber building which met their sustainability criteria, we would have better chance of securing them as a tenant. So it was redesigned, re-engineered as a timber building, pitched to them as a timber building, and they are now taking about 40% of the office building, which underpinned it, enabling it to go ahead in construction. So it's going to be built in the RNA Showgrounds, Royal Agricultural Showgrounds, just on the outskirts of the Brisbane CBD. It's an old showgrounds where we hold fairs, if you like. That might be the American equivalent.
Sure.
Which is being regenerated as an office and a living precinct in a kind of mid-rise scale, so a dense, mixed-use precinct.
Interesting that the building was not originally conceived to be a timber project, that it started as concrete. I think people might be surprised to hear that, because right now timber's still a pretty tall timber. It's a pretty niche thing, and it seems like it's proposed partially to make a statement. In this case, it sounds like you're saying it actually delivered better on all of the prospects of this project.
It certainly delivers better in terms of environmental benefits, its innovation for the economy, and definitely in terms of the project was designed, I think, about 3 years earlier, and hadn't got a tenant. And when we redesigned it as timber, we secured tenants, and the whole thing's moving forward. So happy developer, very happy tenant, very happy architect.
And what do you think the main benefits are as an architect of building with timber? Has it allowed you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, design-wise?
Look, obviously its environmental credentials are fantastic. So you build in timber, the timber sequesters carbon, so there's about a 31% reduction in CO2 emissions of a timber building versus a standard building. So we're actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So massive environmental benefits. We're then designing these buildings with either exposed surfaces or surfaces coming in from underneath the floor so that you can see the timber, because there are what I call benefits to individuals being in contact with nature. So all of us know that feeling when you've been in a city, you just need to get out and reconnect with nature. Timber buildings help you connect with nature. It's called biophilia. We're biological organisms, and we have a need to be a part of the biological world, not just in concrete jungles. So there's a great kind of human feeling about a timber building. You actually, if you go there, you see people rubbing timber columns. They just want to touch nature. So there's a very kind of personal warmth and hands-on. And then, to me, I love the warmth of timber. I think a lot of architects love working in a warm, natural material.
How do we get more timber buildings? Because it's still very much the minority of buildings would be made out of timber, especially over a couple of stories tall.
How do we get more? The industry is growing in Australia. Our expertise is growing. We're starting to produce timber in Australia, and I think that will lead to more. At the moment, the generator it's innovative and different, but I believe once people are in them, it will start increasingly to become the norm. So at the moment, it's driven by people wanting something quite different. We actually designed a 22-storey timber building for North Sydney, which would have been the tallest timber building in the world, bar none. And we designed it for a company called Zurich Insurance. And their CEO had said they were committed to a 50% reduction in carbon emissions from their buildings and their travel by 2020. And we thought that was gold. We thought they would absolutely go for a timber building. What we forgot was they're an insurance company and their business is risk management. And at the end of the day, whilst they loved it, they didn't want the risk of a timber building.
What do they think was so risky about it?
That it's not normal practice is the risk. And a lot of people look at timber and they go, wow, this is a new form of construction. People forget 100 years ago, we were building 8 and 10-storey buildings out of timber. We've actually adaptively reused a number of timber buildings, exposed their timber structure again. I've just done one in Piermont that's 8 stories. It's got a brick facade, but everything structurally inside is timber. It's old technology, not new. The other thing that's the risk is people think it might catch fire.
Right.
And there's these other things. But when you look and think we've had buildings built of timber for 100 years and they're still standing today, I think that's a risk that can be managed.
Is it true that the fire rating is actually better for these new kinds of timber products like cross-laminated timber than some other building materials? How does it compare to traditional building methods in terms of fire safety?
Look, the structure of the timber is designed so that after timber burns, and we're talking mass timber, so we're talking beams that are 400 wide, really thick bits of timber. And as you would know, if you burnt big logs on a fire, it takes the outside burns and then it takes a very, very long time to burn through to the inside. And so timber is scaled, so structurally scaled, so that the structural section is inside the 2-hour char zone. So that after 2 hours, it's really only burnt in maybe in your metric an inch around the outside, and it preserves the structural integrity.
You mentioned Australia now has its own domestic industry for this. Why is tall timber appropriate for Australia in particular?
Well, I should say that's an industry that's developing. So New Zealand has an industry. We're in the process of creating an industry. We do grow timber and we're in the process of setting up an industry. But I think it's appropriate because Australia has a timber industry, New Zealand has a huge timber industry, and environmentally we've committed to the Paris Accord. We're going to try to reduce our emissions, and this is an important step forward. This is how we ought to reduce emissions.
Do you see maybe 25, 50 years from now a certain percentage of buildings being tall timber? You know, if now, I don't know, it's surely less than 1%, would it be 10%? Or are we going to get eventually to some day when most buildings are made out of timber?
I would like to, at the moment, the real push is all timber buildings. And I think that's to say, well, this whole thing is timber. I think as we move forward, I'd like to see timber being integrated, but it doesn't have to be all timber. So it could be what I'd call a hybrid structure.
Sure.
So you could have steel structure with timber floor planks, or you could have a concrete core with all timber floors. So just what I'd like to see is it becoming the norm in terms of a viable option to integrate over any other component in the building industry. Now at the moment, if you do that, you're not really getting credit for doing a timber building. But I think we're at the pioneering edge doing all timber, just to prove that you can start to use these materials in any way. I mean, one of the most fascinating things is with 25 King is it has a timber core. So everything, the core, the floor plates, the beams, the columns, they're all timber. And I think if we can do timber cores, which as you know are about the lateral stability of the building, then we can do anything.